Phil Chambers here again, this series of video interviews with, would you say, influential managers and leaders in their organisations today. Very, very delighted to have with me Steve McGrath, General Manager of Coffs Harbour City Council. How long have you been with Coffs Harbour Council, Steve?
Just over 4 years now. I started mid-November 2010.
Yeah, you're almost a local then.
No, they tell me I've got a lot longer to go.
Yeah, I think you have to have a few grandchildren. And
I'll never be a Sunnyside baby, but I've got a little while to go before.
Well, look, welcome. It's great to have you here. As a bit of context, could you please just chat about, a bit of a bio? Who is Steve McGrath? How did you get here? What's your trajectory to get to where you are right now?
Okay. I'll try and give you the abbreviated version
Sure.
as much as possible, but it probably goes back to when I did my HSC.
Oh.
And it's a funny little story, and I'll give you the really short version. I was going to go off to university,
Okay.
but after having a week off after the HSC and doing the inevitable party time that you do, I went to the local CES office, as they were back then in those days, and I don't want to tell you exactly when because it'll be but I didn't think much was going to come of that. I was looking for some casual work for a couple of months, get a little bit of cash behind me to take off to uni.
Sure.
The day after, they rang me and said, slip down to Wagga City Council and have a chat to this guy, and they're looking for someone, and some 35 whatever years later, it's probably longer than that now, here I am in local government, and it's not something that was on my radar.
Sure.
I guess what I did was, after a couple of months, I decided it was a full-time job come up, and I thought, well, I'll apply for it. I can defer uni if I get it, sort of thing. And I can always go in 12 months or so time. What I did, but was I sort of started to learn more about local government and the opportunities that are there. And I also realised that I could study a business degree by correspondence. So I thought I'd try and start that. If I liked it, well and good. If I didn't, I could take credits and
Sure.
But look, the more I got into it, the diversity of local government and the opportunities career-wise that are there, it was quite attractive, I guess. And in my case, I spent 10 years at Wagga and then decided to leave and look to set my own career path. The town clerk GM at the time tried to get me to stay, suggesting they would find a role for me, but it was a big organisation with a lot of very senior people. Within 3 years, I was a general manager at Youngshire.
Wow.
And then moved on to Singleton, and so all up about 30 years in local government, enjoying that diversity. And I think the other thing that has kept me really interested is, I like to describe it as you have an opportunity to create place, and it's about making sure that we have a better place for our communities to grow and thrive.
Yes,
so,
it's quite a significant impact.
Yeah, absolutely. We were saying just a little while ago, as you know, Phil, that there's not too many parts of the community's life that local government doesn't touch.
That's right.
And I've heard an interesting speaker once talk about his journey from the time he woke up until he arrived at the front door at work.
Oh yeah.
Pardon me. And whether it was cleaning his teeth or using the toilet or using the road, dropping into the library to drop his books off, every step along the way he could relate it back to something to do with council service delivery.
There's so much involved there. I think the importance of that for my students is that we get wound up in individual organisations, and they're all there to contribute something one way or another. Every organisation is there to contribute something positive to the community or the organisation, but everything is held together in some sort of mesh by government, local government, state government, federal government.
Yeah.
And so you sort of have been playing in that field quite significantly for some time now.
Oh, look, absolutely. And as much as in some ways I don't like to admit it, there is bureaucracy, and
Sure.
there is a level of red tape. and that's at federal, state and local level.
Sure.
I guess what I've watched over the years, particularly in 1993 when the new Local Government Act came out, it took away some of the old prescriptive nature of the sort of qualifications you had to have to hold certain roles.
Sure.
And it opened the whole environment up somewhat. And there was a number of people came out of the private sector into local councils thinking they were going to, make good money and change things. There was a lot of good people. Some of them did very well and stayed on. I would have to say to you, from my observation, as anecdotal as it is, the majority of them didn't. They lasted, 12 months, a bit longer, and then went back to wherever they'd come from.
Why do you think that might be?
As I said before, as much as I don't like to admit that there's some bureaucracy and red tape, the fact is it's there. And I guess when you work in the sector, I like to think that we find ways to work, not around it, but you accommodate it.
Yeah, maybe work through it.
Work through it, and recognise that, and I've seen some very good people come onto elected councils in the past, wherever I've been, and very, very good business people. And their success of their business was on the basis that they were quick decision makers and they just moved with the flow. Local government, unfortunately, when there's major issues afoot, there's a whole expectation around community engagement, and things don't necessarily jump as much as I would like to see.
Sure.
But there's a recognition that we need to engage with the community, take them along the journey, get buy-in as much as possible. And I think the emphasis on community engagement is getting stronger and stronger. And we will try and find the ways to do that in a way that informs the community quickly.
Yes.
And bring them along the journey as much as possible so that we can keep the wheels moving.
Yeah, so what's going through my mind as you're saying that is perhaps the process nature of the local government organisation. There's due process, and there's a reason for that. And maybe there are good opportunities in there to, while maintaining the process, to look for ways of making them more effective. Sort of balance between are we an effective organisation or are we an efficient organisation? And perhaps you'd see private as being very efficient but needing to be more effective, and government maybe being more effective and could do with being more efficient.
Yeah, that's not a bad analogy, and it's probably a good segue. We'll jump ahead 2 or 3 questions.
Go ahead, take it as we go.
But that's a lot of what we're doing through this transformation to sustainability project that we're running in-house, and we can go back in a minute and I'll give you the background to that. But the T2S project, as we're calling it, is all about reviewing every process organisation-wide.
That's massive.
It is. It's huge task. But it's about what we've been saying to the organisation. We've done a lot of engagement with our staff around, we're not financially and operationally sustainable. We can't rely on increasing revenue streams, which is predominantly rates.
Yes.
The community will sort of put up with so much, but we need to look at ourselves long and hard, and we've got an obligation to demonstrate that we're efficient and that we've got some robustness about the organisation. So it was really, it's like a compact in some ways, it's been described with the community. Yes. If we're asking you to put your hands in your pocket, we want to be able to demonstrate clearly that we're doing our bit. There was some steps in before we got there, but essentially what we're doing is we're looking at every process and looking at the alignment of processes end to end that align with outcomes to the community.
Sure.
And from that, aligning teams and people and making sure that wherever possible we've taken out barriers. And I guess we want, through engagement with the staff, we want to justify the steps in all the processes. If it doesn't add value to the customer or the service and it's not compliance related, take it out.
So some people listening to this would actually see that as very much a whole of organisation lean for service application. How do you see it? You see it like that? Yeah.
There's lean principles being applied.
Absolutely.
They will be applied. But I think one of the things that I reflect on is that I've seen many organisations that have, the whole best practice systems and processes, but if you don't take the people along the journey with you, then those systems and processes, I won't say they'll fail, but you may not get the best out of them that you possibly could.
Yeah.
So it's important to take the people along the journey, and that's part of the challenge for us.
Yes.
And I guess when we got into, to go back a step, and probably to focus on where Coffs came from.
Yeah, that'd be great to see set the scene a bit.
I guess when I came here in late 2010, we did a little bit of an organisational health check. From a higher level governance and strategic direction. What were we up to? What boxes had we ticked? Yes. Where were the gaps?
And on that review, did you have a particular framework or model that you were using to do that?
Yeah. It's a model, and I should have a little diagram here for you, sure. but it's something I'll give you later.
Yes.
Strategy. It's important to make sure your strategy is right, sure. And it's aligned and everyone's on board. Strategy informs three things: processes and systems,
yes.
Structure, and leadership. And through the alignment of those three things, if you've got strategy informing those three things correctly, ultimately through a process of engagement with the organisation, you'll change the culture,
yes,
improve the culture, align the culture, and once you've done that, you start seeing improvements in service outcomes, service outputs. So it's a pretty simple model that we use to guide our way. But through that process, what we did was we identified a range of issues that we needed to address. Yeah. Let me assure you that it wasn't, I'm not in any way suggesting that Coffs was in a bad place. Sure. I'm not suggesting it was a basket case. In fact, it was quite a mature organisation, and I'd say from a resourcing, people perspective, it was quite fertile.
Okay, good.
But I guess there was some areas, as much as there was good things we were doing, there's some areas where we needed to improve and refine.
And every organisation, if they were
absolutely
honest, would say that's constant.
Absolutely. And I guess in what I've seen over the years in the local government context, in many cases they don't do it as often as they should. Okay. So we set a bit of an improvement journey, and along that way we were improving things like our long-term financial planning, our risk management framework, the quality of the asset management data and systems we had, whole range of governance issues. Community engagement was high on our agenda to try and improve our methodology there. Interestingly, we didn't do it year one, but year two, performance management. I was quite surprised that was one area that was quite deficient in many ways. Okay. But we've made some steps, some inroads there. There's some more work to be done.
Sure.
But I guess we had this approach where we said each year is like a chapter of the journey.
Yes.
So it's a chapter, and we're going to deliver on that. Bite-sized chunks. Let's prioritise and work through this methodically. Along the way, we were improving our asset management data and our long-term financial planning. And we got to a point where we started to realise that we had a fairly significant financial operating gap.
Right.
Our initial phase one asset management plans were suggesting that we were spending something like $13 million less per annum than we should be on maintenance and renewal of assets. Okay. Remembering we've got about $2 billion worth of assets and infrastructure assets.
And it's quite a large footprint that Coffs Council has, isn't it? Could you just give us a bit of a picture of the geography?
Yeah, it's about 1,079 square kilometres. Goes from Red Rock, Corindi in the north down to Bundadjan, just below Sawtell in the south, inland to Nana Glen and Carambra and all those areas, so all the hinterland. It's about 78 kilometres of coastline. With climate change and coastal erosion, that brings significant challenges. It's got a reasonably high growth rate too, yes, which once again puts demands on the organisation to deliver in a growth environment. So yeah, it's got some attributes that you will often see on coastal councils, particularly North Coast of New South Wales, and I guess up into the Sunshine Coast of Queensland. But it's a little different to the inland councils, which are often declining in population and economic capacity and those sorts of things. So when we got to the point of identifying the sort of financial gap that we had, we said we need to refine this. Yeah. And it was about reviewing our systems, our processes, looking at our maintenance and renewal strategies. The phase 2 asset management plans that we developed about 12 months after was around about 2013. Midway through 2013, we started to get a better handle on that. And through simply strategically reviewing the renewal strategies and maintenance strategies, we were able to sort of bring it back to about a $6 million gap, just over six. And then we had an underlying operating deficit as well already, and that's simply the amount by which expenditure outstrips revenue. Okay, so we got revenue growth going like this, but expenditure growth trending like that, and that was about $2 million per annum roughly. We knew that there was some other deficiencies that would be addressed through the asset management planning. We're looking at depreciation rates and those sorts of things, and we're working on that right now. So we set ourselves a target of trying to rein in about $8 million. And I guess given the improvement journey we'd been on and knowing what we had done,
Sure.
To me it seemed that it was a good opportunity to look to get an external body in to peer review where we're at, to look at the organisation with a fairly through a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah. I guess someone who's got some expertise in a particular area and can be objective.
And I guess they're seeing things with a fresh set of eyes, whereas we're probably looking at it in a situation where sometimes you don't see the wood for the trees.
That's it.
So it was to challenge us about our journey we'd been on. What have we done that we could do more of, and what did we need to do more of? What hadn't we touched that needed to be touched?
For sure. So what were some of those key findings from?
There was about 32 recommendations all up, and I actually categorised them into a list, and there was a few no-brainers, things that we knew that we were working on, and they were on the priority list, but we just were working through it methodically. Yes. There was some stuff that we'd started, the performance management process, for example, but we knew needed to evolve further, and they identified that as well. And there was a few things that I guess they weren't surprises as such, but we hadn't identified them as high priority issues. Okay. Off the top of my head, things like looking at procure to pay. So all of the steps in that procure to pay chain in the organisation, and through their analysis, they believe there was a sum of money that we could save across the organisation by improving all of the steps from the point of procurement through to pay. We already have some pretty efficient systems for delivering that. We're probably one of the councils with the highest use of credit cards. Okay. Because credit card transactions as a transactional cost are far more efficient than using a purchase order system where you've got a lot of ongoing processing internally. Right.
Because there's that huge amount of background, process steps that need to be done.
Yep. Every step of the way, you issue the order. You've then got to put in a receipt. You've then got to match them up. The invoice comes in. Someone's got to match it. And, make sure that it's all got the proper sign-offs. Bureaucracy at work.
For sure. And they're there for a reason. But we can get the same quality effect and speed up some of those micro steps along the way that just drive people nuts.
Correct.
How long does it take me to get my money out of this place?
Well, that's the other thing too. We're looking at some of the cash flow scenarios here. A lot of stuff was being paid in 7 days. The trading terms of some of the suppliers was 30 days. So why are we giving it away earlier?
Had generous space.
Yeah. And all of that affects things like cash flow and that. So there's a lot more analysis around things like that. Looking at what else was there? Looking at our integrated planning and reporting framework and how we could get stronger alignment with the resources to deliver an integrated outcome.
Sure.
How we got stronger ownership right across the organisation about around accountability and those sorts of things. Yes. Empowering the staff more. We'd already started that journey, but opportunities to do more. And I guess one of the things that we said was that whilst we'd been on that improvement journey and there was a lot of things identified, it wasn't cutting the mustard as far as delivering in a timely fashion the sort of financial savings that we needed to make and the gains that we needed to make to put us into a financially and operationally sustainable position. So that brought about what was identified as a need for a major transformational step change. So rather than an improvement journey, continuous improvement, how were we going to instigate a major transformational change?
Real quantum shift.
Absolutely. And it was about challenging the organisation to move to an operating environment, a culture where everyone, right from the top to
Yes.
the bottom, thinks, works, manages and leads differently. And to do that, there was a number of things that we needed to get right early on. First one was making sure that we had the right people in the critical leadership roles to drive the transformational change. You know, if you listen to some of the theorists, Cotter was one that we bounced off regularly. You know, you've got to make sure that you've got the burning platform for change.
So did you follow those 8 steps?
Yeah,
Loosely?
Loosely we did, and you know, then it was about making sure that you're taking the organisation along and identifying where people are at, and where people weren't ready for change, you know, or weren't up for it.
Yeah.
How do we deal with it? So, you know, our first step was to, once council in July last year adopted unanimously the whole business case for change.
Council adopted it unanimously.
It was one of the first times in the life of the current council that I've seen them unanimous on an issue.
It's probably the first time I've ever heard of it.
It was quite enlightening for us. But it didn't take long. At the end of August, when we presented a new organisation structure, we were back to, I think one councillor was away, and we were back to the vote was 7-1 in support of the change. So that, you know, there was some, you know, I respect that. There'll always be some slightly different views about how to go about implementing. But what we were presenting was that, you know, to drive this program, we really needed to make sure that we had the right people in the critical leadership roles to drive the agenda going forward, to give it the best chance of success. So what that resulted in was, for the directors and managers, tier 2 and 3 of the organisation, some 30 positions. Those positions all disappeared, and we ended up with 16 new positions.
Okay.
So, you know, from down 14 positions. Now, that didn't necessarily translate to 14 people exiting the organisation.
Okay.
But it meant 14 less positions in those senior leadership roles. Some of the positions, some of the resources needed to go down a level because they were more around facility management, those sorts of roles.
Okay.
So we're still working through some of that. We had a number of people, when we went through the process, a number of people took voluntary redundancy.
Okay.
Some of whom we've had to, because of the nature of the positions, you know, we've essentially got someone back in similar roles.
Yes.
But others that we haven't replaced. And I guess we're at the point now, having gone through a very rigorous recruitment exercise that started end of September 2014. By the end of the first week of December, we had finished the recruitment of the 3 directors' roles to effectively replace what were 4 directors' roles previously. And we'd recruited 9 out of 10 group leaders.
That's a significant...
Yeah, it was a big program, and it was a huge commitment. We wanted to do it and do it quickly.
Yep.
The people told us that, okay, if we're going to have change, we want quick change.
Sure.
So we've been trying to deliver on that as much as possible. And I guess we've had to, in the context, once again, of a local authority, we've had to engage quite extensively, not only with the workforce, but with their unions. And there's 3 different unions that we deal with. One main one, but 3 unions. And I think we've developed a pretty reasonable rapport through that exercise with them.
Yeah.
And, you know, they understand what we're trying to achieve, and they're looking after the interest of their members, but we've been able to work with them fairly well to get to where we are. We're about to look at the next level. Oh, I should say that during that recruitment process, it was a rigorous process. We had, after the initial shortlisting of candidates, all of the shortlisted candidates went through competency assessment with a behavioural psychologist, psychometric testing, including numeracy and verbal reasoning tests. Referee checks were done on all shortlisted candidates. So by the time the candidate presented themselves to the interview panel, we had pretty good background on them. Not only their CV, we had the behavioural psychologist report, we had the referee checks done, and the panel could sit there quite confidently and make choices about the sort of candidates that were suitable for the role, and have that then backed up and supported by a quick conversation with the behavioural psychologist and matching it up and making sure there wasn't something untoward. And And as I said, there was only one area where we went back to the market, that was in our finance area.
Yes.
And we had interviews again only last week for that role, and we're pretty confident that we've got a candidate ready to go.
Oh, good.
So, now that we've got all of the senior and critical leadership roles in place, this week we've started a leadership development and support program.
Excellent idea.
Which is a month-long program, both group sessions with the exec, group sessions with the group leaders, and individual one-on-ones with the behavioural psychologist to actually take through, identify strengths, weaknesses of the team and the individual, where there might be some development required, how we're going to go about that, having personal action plans, team action plans about how we're going to grow the leadership in line with what we need.
So that sounds really, really thorough, getting the new people on board, and in such a big group as well, so establishing culture through the training and having quite an integrated training and support mechanism and fitting that together. How are you going to then keep, you're transforming the organisation in a really significant way, blend the good bits of the existing culture and what's coming into it, because it is such a large intake all at once. And I think I just wanted to say something in between, because we're getting a lot of information there, but a question about training sustainability. A lot of my students who are watching this are managers, and one of the frameworks around this particular transformation set of subjects that they're doing does include a learning component. And that, to me, that's something that is significant that managers play a role in. So how is that learning of coming together, this big cohort of new leaders, the existing leaders and staff, what that meeting point?
Yeah, look, 2 weeks ago we had the first gathering of the new group leaders, and as I said, we've only got one vacancy, which is now we're pretty confident being populated. But we had our first gathering of everyone once they're all on board. There were some internal candidates for the roles who were successful, and there was some mixture of external candidates. I guess we spent some time sitting with all of the players and getting them to start thinking about, I guess it was about setting the scene.
Okay.
Where are we at? You've gone through this rigorous recruitment exercise, but what does it really mean?
Sure.
And for the exec, the three directors and I, what we want to be able to do is to create the space where we're able to be more strategic.
Yes.
More externally focused and more strategic. Constantly looking and working on the business. Where are we heading? What's the strategic direction? What do we need to do to enable that strategic direction to be driven down through the organisation? And that's where we need to have very close links to the group leaders at the next level down. And the way I describe it, that's where they need to understand that in their roles they're going to need to take a step up in what I call the operational leadership in the organisation. Okay. So there's a very important nexus between the executive and the group leaders about making sure that we translate the strategic direction, the political interface, down into the operational delivery across the organisation. So a lot of it's about getting the different players in the teams to understand their roles, to understand what's expected. And we've started to set the scene for that. It comes through, further reinforced through the Leadership Development and Support Program.
Yes.
And at the end of February, the next step will be in March. We'll be sitting down with all of those people again and developing an initial draft or refining an initial draft of a target operating model.
Okay.
A business operating model, if you like. And from that will flow a business operating structure. And those two processes will then guide the whole process mapping and process re-engineering that flows for the remainder of 2015. I guess we've identified that it's so important to have the critical leadership influencing and driving the change program.
Absolutely. And
driving it further down through the organisation. But there'll probably come a point around about the end of March into April when we start to move into the where the rubber really hits the ground around process mapping and re-engineering, where there'll start to be a bit more of a bottom-up approach.
Yes.
But what I'm seeing is it'll need to have some bottom-up element, but heavily influenced by the leadership that's being driven from the people that have been through the Leadership Development Support Program. As much as possible, it's about making sure, it's about recognising that there is leadership right through the organisation.
Absolutely.
At all different levels. But it's very important to get consistency in how that leadership's being applied.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that we're going to focus on quite a bit. And in doing that, it's important that the directors and the group leaders understand their role in influencing that change. So they're not only learning, they're influencing as well. And there'll be various steps along the way where we need to, take stock for a minute and see how we're going. Where are the gaps?
Yes.
What other capacity issues do we have, and how do we build that capacity to enable us to keep driving the change that we need to?
So one of the questions that I've got a few questions that sort of follow on to those. One relates into the future state process mapping and how that fits within the strategy of the organisation, because you're quite right in pointing out it. They can't all be grassroots up because they're not strategists. It's a matter of saying, look, if the strategy is shifting in any way,
how do we guide?
How do we guide not the as-is process mapping, although you could mix how are we doing it now, train people how to do process mapping, and then get them thinking future state within that. Obviously, there's a lot of hard work there. Another question relates to you're looking at gap measures or pulse check along the way. So, what sort of measures are you and the executive team going to be looking at to give you that, the data focus to say we're here there, because there'll be obviously finances, any lead indicators you've got there, but other types of measures you might be using. And the third side of this is something that's been bubbling for a while, is the personal characteristics that are needed from leaders in this, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. People have real lives trying to do this and lead that sort of stuff, so that must take a bit of a gap as well. So maybe if we go through those bit by bit, and if you can look at perhaps how you see the future state process mapping working out a little bit.
Yeah, look, sure. I guess one of the things in adopting the new org structure in late August 2014, it was quite a different structure. Some people looked at it and said, "Oh, well, we had a 3-director structure before." Yeah, we did, but the fundamental foundations of that 3-directorate structure were very different.
That's right. They can look similar, but be quite.
It was very much. I would argue that whether prior to August last year, whether it was a 3-directorate or 4-directorate structure, it was very traditional functional alignments, almost professional alignments. And if you think about the diversity of services and therefore the diversity of people we have, they're quite functionally aligned, if I can use that terminology. The structure that we have in place now, whilst it's in the process of being rolled out, it's very much outcome focused.
Okay.
So it moves away from functional alignments in many ways. It moves away from professional alignments, and in some cases professional alliances. And I guess challenges us to look at the organisation in the context of what outcomes are we delivering,
delivery to the,
and then in context of those outcomes, what processes within the organisation align to enable that service delivery.
So that's quite a significant bit of lean thinking.
Yeah,
right at that point there.
Absolutely. So then taking that and breaking down the processes in the context of that outcome focus should automatically start to create some efficiencies, leanness in the organisation. And importantly then it's about the staff further down in the organisation who are, by and large, responsible for the grassroots service delivery. To understand how if we do it this way we can get better outcomes, and it creates efficiencies. We've been quite upfront with the staff in our communications with them when we first started this journey. There's 2 fundamental outcomes we're looking for here. If we get it right through looking at our accountability for expenditure spend in the field, through looking at our procurement and procure to pay systems, there's, we believe, just under $1 million worth that we can save for the organisation.
And would you consider that, while it's hard work, a bit of low-hanging fruit to some degree? Or a bit more?
In some ways, we've already done some work in that space.
Okay.
So the next steps are a little harder.
Sure.
And it relies on having a very strong invest to save methodology so that the efficiencies translate into dollar savings. But the other second outcome that we've also said have not hidden behind it all is the fact that by increasing our efficiencies in the processes, the steps, by aligning processes to outcomes, etc., and taking out unnecessary steps that may have crept into our service delivery.
And they're always there.
Yep.
They're always there.
Through that process, it will create efficiencies through identifying excess staff capacity. And that means reducing staff resources. And we've said that, nominally we think there's about $2.5 million worth there.
Okay.
We've got to deliver on that. And I guess we're on track in year one to deliver on the projected savings in year one, which from memory was about $1 million.
Good. Well, that's pretty encouraging, isn't it?
So I say we're on track. We're not quite there yet.
No, but still.
But we're getting there, and we're looking at a report to council in March because there's some steps over the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks that will probably yield some additional savings that will help, and it makes sense to report that in a more holistic way. So, I guess the challenge for us then is about by aligning the processes and taking the staff through the exercise, making sure they understand that this has the potential to create efficiencies.
Yes.
How we deal with the people is really important in that exercise.
Yes.
And we don't underestimate that. The unions are keen to see that their members are treated fairly. The further down through the organisation we go, I think a lot of it's going to be about realignment and redesign of positions. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the front end savings will come from how we go about leading, managing and supervising the organisation.
Yes.
And that's where we're focusing quite a bit on that initially. But there'll be elements of that will creep through in the rest of the process re-engineering as well.
Yeah, okay. And so as senior leaders, you're getting a lot of data coming your way. What are the main metrics you're looking at? Obviously, finance, you've mentioned, it was one of the key triggers in the first place, but other sorts of data metrics that you're looking at to see that you are on the track that and on message really with what you want to achieve.
Look, we need to track things like staff morale and productivity, and I think, I'm a realist. There's a fair bit of angst at the moment.
Sure.
People want to know what it means for them, and we've been, once again, quite upfront in saying we can't tell you exactly what it means for everyone from the top to the bottom, but we will engage with you as we get to the various points. So, whilst there's some angst there now, I think the challenge is at the end of the program, people, we would hope, feel that they're able to be more productive, that there's more meaning in what they're doing, they can connect to what they're doing and how it impacts on the community.
Sure.
That they feel part of the bigger wheel, the bigger organisation that's delivering on the community's vision.
Yeah.
So that should result in improved morale and improved productivity. Should result in job satisfaction. So our staff survey will start to provide, which we're doing every couple of years now anyway.
Good.
Should start to produce some good indicators as to how we're tracking.
Okay.
And I'd have to say to you, we did one midway through last year, just before we announced this program, and we were trending up as it was anyway, in the results of the staff survey and the satisfaction. As I said, no doubt we'll take a bit of a dip, but 18 months' time when we do another survey, hopefully
change always does that, Steve.
Yeah.
We know that people don't like it. Change is not ubiquitous with improvement, and over time, adults get a bit cynical. And it's easy to say, look,
absolutely,
and say, but you've talked about, high levels of leadership transparency, which is not only admirable, it's necessary. Because you're dealing on an adult-to-adult relationship with those folks there, which leads into that third area I wanted you to talk about, and that is the personal capabilities and characteristics, the stuff needed by leaders to pull this kind of massive transformation off.
Look, I will talk about that, but I need to mention a couple of other metrics.
Oh, please do. Sorry.
We're looking very much at our employment costs and managing our employment costs. So we've identified that sick leave across the organisation is, by benchmark standards, higher than it should be, than it necessarily should be. So, we're putting pressure on our managers, our group leaders to manage that. Looking at our leave liability, trying to haul it in. So managing a lot of those employment costs.
Sure.
And I think some of the other critical things that we need to really get right is make sure that we don't. All of this needs to be delivered in the context of not reducing the level of service to the community. So tracking customer satisfaction with services to the community, the service they're receiving, which we do a sort of survey every couple of years.
Yes.
And once again, it's been trending the right way, but we want to make sure that we don't take a dip in that area too.
Sure.
So there's some of the key things we'll look at. And there's probably more, but off the top of my head, they're probably the main ones.
That's quite...
Looking at some of the individual leadership attributes, one of the things that we did through the recruitment exercise in September, October, November last year was to really look closely at the attributes of individuals who were candidates for the roles, whether they be internal or external candidates. And we were looking at whether they had the right leadership competencies around, and we spent a bit of time developing the competency profile, and please don't ask me to repeat it verbatim,
okay.
but things like their honesty, the standard ones around honesty, integrity, communication, self-awareness, and a lot of that was built into the psychometric testing that we did to try and draw that out and to look at the emotional intelligence that people had, their abilities to the verbal reasoning, the numeracy testing. But I guess importantly, you can have people in critical leadership roles who are very good at engaging and keeping up to date and staying on top of things from the point of view of a continuous improvement journey.
Yes.
But that continuous improvement approach is quite different to a transformational step change.
Very different.
So being able to, one of the things we focused a lot on was looking for people to put into these roles who had attributes that demonstrated that they had experience or a good, strong awareness at least of what was needed to take people through that transformational step change. It's about being able to understand the vision, interpret it and convey the vision to the people that work for you. It's about being strong communicators. It's about engaging and taking the rest of the people that are with you along that journey. And I guess it's about always having your eyes open as much as possible to see what's coming around the corner, particularly when we're looking for improvements in processes like we are right now. So having a broader vision, not just focusing on in here, it's about understanding the context of this and how it interrelates with the rest of the organisation.
So a much broader sense of situational awareness.
Correct.
And strong empathy.
Correct. Yeah. And as I said, emotional intelligence, so awareness of the people, and being able to deal with that in a very objective and open way. But recognising that in processes like this, some of the people issues are going to bubble to the surface quite a lot, and you've got to be able to deal with those very openly and very transparently.
Okay. Look, that's been really quite enlightening, getting into how much depth and how much rigour has been put into such a significant change. So I've just got really two questions left. First one's going to be with the transformation, so not the continuous improvement aspects of it, but with the transformation, how will you know when you get there? and then we'll boil that down afterwards to summarising your key principles for success in transformation. So if you want to hit us with you've got a picture, you've got a goal, this is where we're heading. How will you know when the transformation or the major bulk of that is over and it's just into continuous improvement?
Yeah.
What are you going to be seeing as the leader?
Yeah. Okay. I guess one of the things that to answer that, just to go back one step,
Sure.
one of the methodologies we've applied here to make sure that we drive it is a program management methodology.
Mm-hmm.
So strong project management principles,
Okay.
but overarched with the program management board and a program management approach. And it's about driving it. So we've actually seconded some resources into a role of manager business transformation who reports direct to me. And with the three directors, that manager and myself, we formed the board and are really focused on regular meetings, separate to the exec and the other normal processes, so it's quite separate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about driving that change process methodically.
So like a business engineering team to some
Absolutely,
degree.
absolutely. And we're about to look at seconding some additional project management resource
Mm-hmm.
from within the organisation to assist in that process, because the rest of this year is going to be pretty full on.
Yeah.
And there will be a number of project teams, with each of the group leaders basically filling the role of project sponsor for their particular area, and they'll drive with the assistance of the project managers the change process.
Mm-hmm.
We, on top of that, we also have through a tender process, we have some external resources, which I'm glad to say happens to be the organisation that helped us through the diagnostic in the early part of last year.
And there's certainly a logic to that.
Absolutely, they know the organisation, they know what we're looking for. We've built some good relationships with them.
Mm-hmm.
We went through a very independent tender process. That they were successful, thank God.
Yes.
And they're back here right now, working with us in driving that continuing.
It's sort of become
change process.
a borrowed part of the family for a while.
Yeah, trusted advisor.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing you're looking for. So the whole program from start to finish is meant to be a 3-year life.
Okay.
And we've set an investment pattern that we need to deliver to enable the savings to be realised. We've got over the life of it, we've got tracked what savings we should be making at different points. But at the end of the day, I guess the real goal for us is at the end of the 3rd year, we want to be delivering $3.2 million per annum savings, operational savings, on an ongoing basis.
Sure.
So that's the number one goal to start with.
Yes.
Will we be financially and operationally sustainable at that point? That depends on some other financing strategies that need to pair up. I mentioned the compact earlier.
Yes.
So there's still a need for us to look for some revenue.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a need for us to look for some more robustness around our asset management and looking at some things like our infrastructure backlog. Is it realistic?
Sure.
How should we be measuring it? And by doing that, we're likely to be looking very closely at our depreciation rates.
Yes.
I believe that depreciation rates will drop.
Okay.
And if that happens, it will improve our bottom line from an accrual accounting perspective. So it will help the situation as well. So there's a number of things that need to align. They're the sort of tangible things that you can touch that I guess demonstrate financial sustainability.
Yeah, which to some degree was the key driver.
Absolutely.
Because it's survival, don't survive.
Absolutely. I guess I can't jump ahead too far at the moment, but I mentioned earlier that we're looking at introducing a target operating model.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do business around here?
Yes.
And what I would like to think is that maybe we're close at the end of 3 years of having the people in our organisation who have a real affinity for that target operating model.
Yes.
And the culture is starting to change in a way that recognises this is why we're doing it, this is why we did the last 3 years,
Yes.
and this is what we need to keep doing to enable us to hit that target operating model. Mm-hmm. And if I do that, I'm going to get satisfaction out of what I do. It's not always about money, although a lot of people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot about job satisfaction. It's about morale. It's about feeling part of a team that's delivering on a broader vision.
And a lot of that balanced scorecard approach is sort of what you're talking about there. You've got one corner where it's the finance, which you cannot escape. But like you're saying, it's not all about that. So balancing it with staff satisfaction, process efficiencies, customer or constituent satisfaction, all sort of mixing together.
Exactly, and I think the other thing that's probably less tangible is how we're going with our customer satisfaction survey. So it's not only about the internal metrics, it's about the external metrics. How is the customer seeing us? Are we still delivering what we said we would, given where we were 3 or 4 years earlier?
Sure.
Has there been a dip in the level of service, or is the customer getting levels of service that they had previously, but it's been done more efficiently, more effectively, and there's better outcomes overall for the community and for the internal stakeholders? So there's some of the things that we're quite keen to sort of track and measure those and see how we're going. And
very thorough, very sort of whole of business in that way.
Yeah, and of course, I guess for our elected councillors, their measurement comes from what happens probably September 2016 in the month of election. Whether they're seen to have been doing a good job by guiding this process, and or whether whether God forbid things aren't quite aligned, and the community takes a different approach at the ballot box. But as I said, things are tracking very well at the moment. We're about to do our first sort of status report, probably Marchish, and I'm quite confident that we're going to deliver quite well. That's
very exciting. That's very encouraging when you go into that sort of organisational battle to get those kind of results. And so I think rather than sort of go into another lead question now, I'd like just to summarise, or you to summarise for the postgrad management students that are watching this now. Can you summarise what you see as the principles for the success in organisational transformation and strategy transformation?
You need to be aware of the issues. You've got to really understand and be aware of the issues. Number one. You've then got to be able to present to the organisation that burning platform, the analogy back to the Cotter environment. So
critical need.
Why do we need to change? What's the main drivers here? And if we don't do anything, it's the old Einstein. You keep doing what you've always done, you get the same result. So it's about creating that environment where people understand the need for change and support it. But it's interesting, I've seen a little cartoon that I've used recently where there's a man standing at the front of a crowd of people at a lectern, and he says, who wants change? And the whole crowd, everyone's got their hands up. And the next panel in the cartoon jumps up, the same man standing, he says, who wants to change? And all these people are sitting there with their head down, the same people sitting there with their head down. So it's about how you take the people along that journey, and I think that's a critical message here.
That's very good.
It's one thing to get people to recognise there's a need for change, but they've got to want to change themselves. Yes. And I guess for me, if I look at August last year, there was pretty good acceptance that we needed to do something. The message was quite clear. There was an imperative to do something. But when we announced what that new structure looked like at Tier 2 and 3 to the leadership, the then leadership team, it was like, oh shit, that's me. So I guess, and that created a real period of grieving, anger, which only took a couple of weeks to sort of, by and large, dissipate. And some of the same people that were probably angry and bitter with me initially were suddenly ringing me and saying, how you going, boss? And it was a couple of very interesting conversations where I said, guys, I thought you were still a little bit miffed. And, oh, yeah, look, I've had time to sit and think it through. And guess what? Does the structure change that's impacting me mean that we shouldn't be doing it? Answer, no, we still need to do something.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that I'm going to be implicated, but I need to push along with it if we're going to get the change that we're looking for.
That's right.
So I guess, you know, you really got to work hard to get that message across, and don't be surprised that you'll get some anger and angst and grieving along the way, but you've got to keep working through that and keep selling the message. And I guess where was I heading with this? The other thing is giving information back. How are we going?
Yes.
And I guess demonstrating clearly that the plans that you've had are delivering. And it means that we're on the right track.
Yes. And
you're part of it. You're assisting us in delivering.
Yeah, I see that resonating in the change and the transformation literature. There's a lot about what they call feedback loops.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to close the loop. And it's one thing that I think local government traditionally hasn't done well.
Okay.
But you know, we spent a bit of time about, you know, talking through how do we continuously close the loop, give feedback, enable people to ask questions openly.
Yep.
We're looking at, we've been trying as much as possible the last 8 months or so of talking to the organisation in smaller groups so that we get better interaction. You know, I can remember the times when I'd go down to the Norm Jordan Pavilion and talk to the field staff, and there'd be 250, 300 staff in there, and I could see their eyes glazing over. Because in that forum, you know, it's like,
It's big.
yeah. But you get them into smaller groups and there's more interaction, and that's something we've been working on. And it takes a lot out of my diary and the directors and that, but if you can see improved communication outcomes as a result, it's very much worthwhile.
Okay.
We're looking very closely at our communication mechanisms too, trying to be as broad as possible, really about keeping that those information channels open.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's terrific. You know, I think just looking through.
Did I miss anything on that last question?
I don't think so. Yeah, unless you had some other key principles of, you know, success from a leader's point of view. When you've got a strategy transformation coming along.
The one thing I think that we do need to get right. There is one other thing that I think we do need to get right, and we've identified it already, and that is we've touched on it, the continuous improvement component, which we're not focused on at all at the moment. It's about a major transformational change. But what we have suggested is that when we get to the end of the 3-year implementation, if it takes us that long, we're hoping to do it quicker.
It'd be nice if it was quicker.
Yeah. You know, we may need to take stock, and I think we might need to realign some of our resources to really focus on that, continue to focus on the continuous improvement journey. Most organisations should do that. For us, I think there's a bigger motivator, and it's around the simple fact that we will still have, I believe, rate pegging legislation in place. And what that has done to us over 35 years is effectively create that operating gap that I talked about. So if we don't continuously improve and continue to become more efficient in how we go about things, with rate pegging doing what it normally does, our expenditure profile will continue to grow quicker than our revenue profile. So we're looking very seriously, and we'll be tracking this to see if there's a need for us to look at how we might continue to focus some resources in the program board area, but put their focus more onto continuous improvement once we get the tasks done that we need to initially.
No, that's actually quite a very cogent way, you know, to wrap up the interview, talking about here's the transformation and the work involved in that, and then when it's over, it's never really over.
No, it's never really
over. Not the life of improving. Well, Steve, thanks very much for your time.
Cheers,
I appreciate
not a problem,
it.
Phil.
And I look forward to my students giving me some, you know, Facebook comments back and all those sort of things that they do from time to time.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.